G'day all and welcome to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. My name is Chris Hayton and this is part 2 of the Brewery Consulting and Quality Management segment. Today's episode I chat with well-known figure in the brewing community, Steve Hendo from Rockstar Brewer. If you haven't heard of Steve Hendo, he famously made his name in the brewing community as the founder of the BrewCult brand. Hendo did the gypsy brewing model for many years and built a massive cult following with his beers, eventually developing a big core range, exciting beer geeks all over the country with his innovative beer styles. Eventually, things didn't quite go to plan for Hendo with the BrewCult brand, which he explains in more intimate detail in our chat, in which he then decided to take a step back from running a brewing business to just working in the industry by having a stint at Stone & Wood as a shift production brewer. After finding his feet and deciding on what next is in store for him in the beer industry, he then began consulting breweries on best brewing practices and quality processes for their beer production, which gave birth to his current business, Rockstar Brewer. To give the audience a heads up about our chat, Hendo does not hold any punches and is brutally honest about what it takes to open and run a successful brewery. He shares his mistakes, challenges and lessons learnt from his BrewCult days, and he discusses the importance of quality management controls and processes with breweries and how he helps breweries both new and established to ensure high quality beer is being produced batch to batch. It's a mammoth episode, an hour and 20 and potentially our longest one to date, but if you are serious about wanting to know how to build a brewery or just interested to know what happened to the mighty BrewCult brand, then you don't want to miss a minute of this episode. So I'll leave it to you then. I hope you enjoy my chat with Steve Hendo from Rockstar Brewer. Welcome, Hendo, to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Not to sort of give you a big head early on. I feel like I've met a beer celebrity, actually. I'm quite blown away by the sort of response a lot of people have given me to want to participate and get involved, especially your sort of stature in the industry. So it's really good to have you involved and share your wisdom and experience that you've had throughout the industry.
Well, you're on a bit of a journey yourself, so it's good to be part of it.
Yeah, so like I've done it with many of the guests, I've given them a bit of a rundown of yourself. I'm sure many beer enthusiasts and people in the industry are quite well aware of your name and what you do. But if you wouldn't mind giving the listeners a bit of a spiel about yourself, maybe start it off with, your home brewing or craft beer roots and how you came to be where you are in the industry now.
Yeah, sure. I'm Hendo. I run a company called Rockstar Brewer, and so I'm basically a brewer coach. I've been a professional brewer for about 12 years now, and prior to that, I was like IT consultant. Spent a couple of summers in Europe as a tour guide, and but mostly working in IT. But always been a bit of a beer fan, even right back into when I was a much younger chap and had hair and was always into home brewing. But I guess my first introduction to home brewing was my father, who was a really shit home brewer. Like I remember being a kid and waking up in the middle of the night with bottles exploding under the house, underneath my bedroom.
That's every home brewer's
That's how
nightmare.
Good he was. Yeah. So, I sort of got into home brewing in a really dumb way. I sort of won a year's supply of Evian water and decided that I would make beer out of the Evian water, and that kind of got me quite hooked on the whole thing. And for about 10 years, I did a lot of kit and kilo brewing, a lot of Cooper's kits and stuff like that, as everyone starts out.
Yep,
was still shit at that, and then in the early 2000s. I was living in Perth at the time, and I sort of started doing brew on premise brewing at a local brew on premise shop where you could go make 50 litres a time. The beers were turning out really good. And I went, I really want to, and it was still extract brewing, right? So you still had all this goop coming out of a 44-gallon drum and that sort of thing, and you're boiling it up and adding hops and stuff like that. And I had no idea, that it was made from barley malt or wheat or something like that. This is kind of really sort of pre-home brewing forums and stuff like that as well. There probably were a few around, but I just didn't bother with it. And I basically decided that I would dive all in and go and do a postgraduate degree in brewing. So I studied at Edith Cowan University for a year And then I went overseas to go and work in the UK for a while, so I deferred. And while I was away, they actually closed the brewing school for a few years because the main teacher there got quite unwell. There wasn't any plans to reopen the brewing school at Edith Cow, and I really wanted to continue my studies. And so basically I had to quit that uni and move over to the University of Ballarat, or Federation Uni as it's called now. And so I did the graduate certificate of brewing, and that took me about 4 years to do part-time. And, during that time I was married, and we were going to open a brewery and that sort of thing, and marriage ended, and I sort of came back home to Queensland and decided I'd finish the degree. I decided, big life change. I didn't really want to go back to IT. I kind of had enough. Yeah. And so I decided to finish my studies and start working in the industry. So that's how I kind of started, my life as a professional brewer, and it's been a bloody good journey so far. It's had its ups and downs, but it's been really good. So in general, yeah, I love it.
And what was your first job in the commercial or brewing industry?
Yeah, the first job that I'd probably count would be working with Luke Scott down at Prickly Moses in the Otways, a couple of hours west of Melbourne.
Yep.
And so, I packed myself up from Queensland and moved all the way down to Colac and worked there for about 3 years. And that's where I sort of really cut my teeth in the industry. Luke's a bloody good bloke to work for. And we made some really good beers. I remember sort of, didn't take too long before I had my first beer recipe commercially released, which was Black Panther, a black IPA. I don't know. It was interesting because that beer debuted in Chloe's Bar at Young and Jackson, right in Melbourne, right across from bloody Flinders Street Station there. And to actually see people, try your beer and paying for it and that sort of thing, that sort of really made me go, oh, this is kind of cool. And then things sort of really grew from there.
Yeah, no, I'm sort of still looking forward to that day of where, it's not just a mate who's saying, oh, your homebrew's absolutely awesome. And, I've had that many times before.
It's a bit of a game changer, though.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. I actually recently, me and the mates of mine that are actually considering going down this path of opening a brewery, we submitted a homebrew in a homebrew competition with the Australian Hotel, actually, in the Rocks in Sydney. So I think Akasha Brewing were sponsoring it.
Yep.
So
yep. I know
they I think it was just like a COVID homebrewing comp, and there was no real particular rules, just any beer style, any ABV or IBU, whatever. And, the winner would get their homebrew made commercially by Akasha. I think there was about 10 kegs that they were going to brew, and half of that was going to be on sale at the Australian and the other half at Akasha's brewery in Five Dock. And unfortunately, we weren't successful, but we got a lot of good feedback, which I guess was the main thing I wanted out of it. But
what'd you make?
An XPA, actually.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah, it was either that or a Pilsner, but I drank the Pilsner before I actually submitted it. So I thought, I'll get this XPA in. But no, it was good to get, some professional feedback. It would have been great to be able to sit there with all my mates and family and say, that's our beer on tap there at the Australian. But yeah, I guess those little moments are sort of inspiring me to want to keep going down this path.
You've got that ahead of you, really. So,
yeah, exactly.
It is a lot of fun. I do enjoy watching punters drink and enjoy my beer. It's part of the satisfaction of being a brewer, I guess, in that you make a beer and you do a good job of it and they're prepared to pay for it. More importantly, if they're prepared to pay for it again and again, that's a pretty good outcome, to have. I mean, beer's a very social thing, and I take every opportunity that I can to sort of get in front of punters and drink my beer with them. And that's why I sort of love the beer festivals and gabs and all that sort of stuff. It's just good fun. It's just part of being a brewer, really. Yeah,
exactly. Well, I guess just on your brewing, so a lot of listeners would probably know that you're the man behind the famous BrewCult brand in your
That is
Gypsy
correct,
Brewing,
yes.
Gypsy Brewing days. Do you want to sort of share some insights about what you've learned from the Gypsy Brewing days?
Yeah. Oh, look, it was a lot of fun. It was a fun, I think 4 or 5 years. It ended up running for. I started it in 2013. I was head brewer at Southern Bay Brewing Company in Geelong at the time. Always had in my mind that I would start my own brewing company. And when I sort of finished up at Southern Bay, I went, well, this is the time to do it. Just so happened that there was another brewery in Melbourne that was opening that was actually selling tanks, that you could rent a tank in this brewery and make your own beer. And so that kind of worked out really well and very timely. And so I decided that I would do beers that were quite innovative. You know, the first 2 beers that I released in 2013 was my 2013 Gabs beer, which was Acid Freaks, which was a balsamic Baltic porter, and Hop Zone, which was a session IPA, which was very unheard of at the time. You know, the XPA and session IPA and all that sort of stuff gets thrown around lots now, but not really back in 2013. It was all about pale ale and that. And so from there, you know, it was all about, you know, BrewCult was all about creating new flavour experiences for punters. And so I had to be quite innovative in the types of beers that I was making. I kind of figured that if I just made something interesting that people would buy it, and that was largely the case. And, had a lot of fun doing a lot of beers. Did a series of 5 beers called the Psychedelic Series, and they were all IPAs. They had a lot of commonalities. They sort of shared the same starting gravity, although a couple of them had slightly different ABVs because of the yeast or malt. But they were all sort of IPA. So basically there was black IPA, a white IPA, a red IPA, a farmhouse IPA, and an American brown. And they all had cool names and cool psychedelic 60s style labels on them. And it was a lot of fun, you know. And probably another beer that a couple of beers I'm pretty proud of from the BrewCult days was doing one of the first IPLs, India Pale Lagers, which was called Beer Geek Rage Quit. And so I recruited a good mate of mine, Matt Hoffman, who was a alternative model at the time. And so we put his face on a beer label, had all these different colours, and organised it with my label printer so that we would have like golden labels. And so there was a series, you could collect them all, collect all the labels. And then there was the golden label. And then so that was really fun. People was label collectors, man. They're weird people.
Wow.
I had people calling me going, I'm trying to find the gold one. I'm like, I don't know where it is. I just randomly shoved them in the bloody pallet, you know. And,
you didn't promise them a tour of the chocolate factory or anything, did you?
No, I think the prize was they got some merch. They got a Matt Hoffman T-shirt and a case of beer or something like that. And it was a lot of fun, you know. And then getting into some of the beers in for Gabs and that sort of thing. So in 2015, BrewCult won the Gabs People's Choice Award.
Yes,
175 breweries that year. So it went from 110 to 175 breweries that year, festival beers, sorry. And so did a beer called Milk and Two Sugars, which was a imperial milk stout with coffee. It just had a ludicrous amount of lactose and coffee in it, basically. Yeah. It was, it had 3,000 shots of espresso and 120 odd litres of cold drip in it. Teamed up with Axel Coffee Roasters in Melbourne, and they basically locked one of their. They have a barista training academy there. They locked one of the trainees in this training academy room for about 4 days and said, "Don't come out until you've got 3,000 shots of espresso, mate." And I'd never met the guy, but geez, I feel sorry for him. And that was a lot of fun. 2016 won the Champion Gypsy Brewer Award at the Australian International Beer Awards.
Yeah, that must have been a pretty proud moment.
I always wanted to make it had been a long time goal of mine to make a beer as good as Hop Hog, and that year I achieved that. And because I remember my first time going to the AIBAs, I think it was 2009 or something like that, and I was still a student. not working in the industry, but studying. And so I went to the AIBAs, I think it was at the Crown Palladium or something like that. And I only knew there was 750 industry people there, and I knew 2 people in the room. And I saw Brendan Varys, win lots of trophies and that sort of thing, mostly for Hop Hog, but for the other beers that he was doing and that sort of thing. And I said to myself at the time that I wanted to make beer that good. And it took a long time and progression through a lot of breweries to basically get to that point where I was making beer that was that good and immensely. Oh, that's my trophy behind me. You can see.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You can't see on the podcast because it's all just sound nerdy, but we're sitting here on Zoom and that's the trophy.
Yeah, I can see you got your BrewCult memorabilia there.
And, exactly. So, and so that was a pretty good moment, I'm very proud of the achievements there. Unfortunately, operating a gypsy brewery operating a brewery in general is very cash flow intensive. And I'd done a lot of different things to try and sustain and grow the business. And I was trying to do it organically. I had a couple of business partners, but some of them were in it for a get rich quick. And that's just not what, running a brewery is about. You do it for the love of it, not to get rich quick. Ultimately, what happened was we built a bar and the bar was just not very successful at all, and it kind of dragged the whole business down, and that really ended it. By that time, to be fair, I was pretty exhausted, pretty tired of living on bugger all money, and just really still love brewing, still love beer, but running a brewing business, I kind of figured that it was not for me. I know that there are lots of people out there who miss BrewCult and would love to see it come back. Unfortunately, I don't own it anymore. All the trademark and everything was sold in the liquidation. But that said, though, it is owned by it's in very good hands. So it's owned by someone who's Sydney based who is operating a brewery now. So you never say never. But for now, I kind of decided that operating a brewery wasn't for me. And, after BrewCult finished, just before it all sort of, died in the ass, I was in Byron Bay for the AOP in 2017 for the Australian International Beer Award collaboration. So they had the champion, small, medium, large and gypsy brewer get together. So it was Two Birds, Pirate Life, Stone and Wood and BrewCult. We did a collab for the ARBAs. And so, standing on the brew deck with Keelan, who's the head brewer at Stone and Wood, and I just said, look, mate, BrewCult's pretty much done for. And I said, I really could just use a job, mate. And he said, sure, no worries. Come and have a chat to the HR, lady and that sort of thing. And so when BrewCult did end up ceasing to trade, I was very fortunate that Stone and Wood took me, under their wing and just put me on shift, so I could just brew on shift. I was living on the Gold Coast, working at the big production brewery in Moolumbar, and I could just be on shift, and I didn't have to worry about running a business. And there was a steady paycheck, and the people there are great, and very grateful for that opportunity because the year that I was there, it really helped me to heal and figure out what I was going to do next.
Yeah, I recall seeing a quote you made, and I don't know if it's exact. I think it was on a Crafty Pint article, and you said if running a brewery was only brewing it and drinking it and nothing else, then that would be amazing. I think it was basically a reference to
what I said.
Reference to the back end stuff and all the
probably what I would have said is that making beer and brewing beer and that sort of thing is something that I enjoy and I love and I still love and that sort of thing. But when you bring in money into operating a brewery and working out how you're going to pay your next excise bill and managing cash flow and all that sort of stuff, that can be very exhausting very quickly, And so I probably would have said something like, I used to say to people, they'd say, oh, Hendo, I want to do what you do. And I'd go, cool. If you don't mind, making beer, but at the same time, lying in bed at night, wondering how you're going to pay that next excise bill and worrying about money. And if you're okay with that, cool, give it a go. But if you're not, then you're better off just sticking to home brewing and brewing for your mates and keeping it fun and keeping it a hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah,
good advice.
Because basically at the end of the day, it is a business and you have to treat it like a business. I guess maybe when I started BrewCult in 2013, I thought it would just be fun, and I kind of took it as a bit of a folly, and it got really serious over time. And there were parts of running a brewing business that I just did not enjoy at all. And, I loved doing events, but I hated selling beer. I hated managing the finances, and trying to wear so many hats, it can be very exhausting.
Was it not a consideration? Because I think another article I read where you said next time if you were to do it again, you'd have more people involved instead of wanting to be the main man wanting to do it all, which was basically what you were doing with BrewCult. So
absolutely, yes, I can absolutely hand on heart say that the biggest inhibitor to BrewCult and why it didn't succeed was me. I have no doubt in my mind that I was the thing that made it fail.
Yeah.
Right? Because I guess at the time I was very reluctant to take on business partners. And when I did, I didn't really consider the ramifications of taking on a business partner. And that sort of came back to bite me in the bum a bit later and that sort of thing. And yeah, but that's just chalk it up to experience, I suppose. So
yeah, well, some of the
I think to that point, I guess the thing that if I was to do it again, I definitely would make sure that I had like-minded people to start the business with, and also make sure that they were prepared to be a partner in the work effort that goes into running the business. Not that my former business partners didn't work in the business, but rather having a shared vision, about where the business go. And sort of, I think if I look at sort of like a brewery like Brewdog and that sort of thing, you got James Watt and Martin Dickey, who are the founders, and they know they've got each other's back. They're a great team, and love or hate Brewdog, that's not relevant to this conversation. But if you look at those two individuals as a team, they are a great team, and I would probably say that there are some really good examples in Australian breweries where you have some really good teams. Jane and Danielle from Two Birds is probably a really good example.
Yeah.
Smokey and Lukey from Currumbin Valley Brewing,
Oh, yeah.
They are an amazing team, those guys, and they are complementary in their skills. And as such, the business is thriving because of those two people. So, yeah.
Do you think that if you did end up running your own brewery, you had a business partner or business partners, you probably would have found a love to just be the head brewer and, maybe find someone that would want to just run the operations side of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I would have loved to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, a number of the guests I had on in our Meet the Brewer series, which is just, a collection of Sydney brewers, I met with, I think Pete from Wayward mentioned it, there comes a point where, you've got to decide whether you want to be the head brewer or whether you are going to be the general manager or CEO.
The business, the operations manager.
You just can't do both. So, but
can't do both.
No. I'd love to talk more about your, I guess, the services that you offer through Rockstar.
Yeah.
How you help up-and-coming breweries or established breweries improve. I know you're really big on quality management and beer quality and consistencies. So, yeah, tell us a bit about Rockstar and what you offer. Yeah,
so Rockstar Brewer, it's not named. It was funny. It got its name from Mazen Hajar from Hawkers in Melbourne, because when I had BrewCult, and he would always come up to me when we were at beer festivals and he would go, "Hendo, you are a rockstar brewer. The women must throw their panties at you," and all that sort of stuff, right? And he's a funny bugger, and he's bloody great, But and so I just one day, and I was still working at Stone and Wood and that sort of thing, and I just thought, Rockstar Brewer, that's an interesting name. I wonder if the domain's available. Oh, domain's available. I bought that. I wonder if the Instagram's available. Yeah. Twitter. Yeah. Facebook. Yeah. Just got this just as a name. And I just sort of sat on it, had it as a bit of a personal blog and stuff like that. And, my tenure at Stone & Wood was just a fixed term contract just to help me get back on my feet. And so when that finished up, I sort of decided, well, originally I thought I'd go down the consulting path, but as the Rockstar Brewer business has evolved, I realized that I'm not a consultant. I consider myself more to be a brewer coach. And the difference between a consultant and a coach is that a coach, I work with my clients and they already know how to brew. I help give them the tools to make their beers amazing. So that's what I generally do now. And a lot of my business, even when I started it in 2017, it was online. And I spend a lot of time on Zoom. I did use pre-COVID. I sort of did a lot of traveling around the world and around the country and stuff like that. And then when COVID hit, it was just a natural progression to turn it into online. And so the main thing that I do now is I have a program called the Rockstar Brewer Implementation Program. And so basically it's a group of like-minded brewers who are either started or growing, who are working their way brewing their first 1 million litres of product. Okay, so that's 10,000 barrels in the American old money, right? Yep. And so it's not a run rate. It's like every brewery has to make its first 1 million litres of beer. And so what I do is I give brewers the tools to make that first 1 million litres of product award-winning and world-class. And so there's a lot of things that I learned as a gypsy brewer and working at lots of other different breweries as well, where I've just sort of unpacked that knowledge and offer that to my clients. And it's awesome. It's a really fast growing group at the moment. So we have like a private Facebook community where we all nurture and support each other. You'll probably find as you're building your brewery and that sort of thing, you might jump onto one of the popular forums out there, or worse still, you get onto a bloody homebrew forum and you'll ask a question. You ask a question and you get 10 different opinions, and there's no, you end up being more confused than when you started. But whereas in my group, we consider ourselves to be a team. We respect that everybody's at a different stage of their brewery history. Every brewery is different. Every brewer is different. And we work together to achieve that common goal. And the common goal that we work on is to have fun brewing. And for what does it mean for a brewer, a professional brewer, because that's why we do it, right? It's why you're building a brewery. Yeah, you want to have fun brewing, right? And what does that mean? What sort of things does that mean for you, Chris, to have fun brewing if you're going to be a professional brewer?
Yeah, well, I think ever since I made the switch to all grain a couple of years ago, just that first batch I brewed, following the process, and the first batch went really, really well. And just following that process, because I come from a sales background, I sell human beings for a living, and they can let you down any day of the week. So, but just making sure that it was on me, following a process, making sure I hit my targets, and then 2 weeks later, I've got a nice product that I can share with my mates, and they can say, mate, this is good, or might need a little bit of work or whatever. It following that process just made this sense of achievement. I just thought Absolutely. Sharing that on a commercial level just really, I don't know, it sort of was a light bulb moment for me. And
yeah, exactly.
And that's the whole reason I want to do it.
Exactly. It's three things. For a professional brewer, their ultimate goal, right, is nothing more than to have fun brewing. That's why I do it. I love it, and it's fun, right? But why do we want to have fun? And what it is, and you've just outlined it perfectly, right? Which is you are making a brewing beer that you're proud of, right? And it's amazing. You're learning every day, right? And you're building brand loyalty, like as in people love your beer.
Yep.
Right? That's what it means for a professional brewer to have fun brewing. And that's what the Rockstar Brewer Implementation Program is about. And so we have 9, I call them accelerators, 9 key things that a brewery needs to do in order to build a brewery that's fun to operate. And so we look at things like how to make a plan about your quality so that every time you make the same beer that it gets made in the same way so that it's consistent. How to take measurements and trust that data and deal with errors and stuff like that. How to minimize dissolved oxygen. One of the big parts that we sort of deal with that is just mind-blowing. It's like one of those moments for a lot of the clients is brewing water chemistry. You know much about that?
Yeah, I know what my water additions are for my local area. I've got the report.
Yeah.
And I know I've got to chuck a bit of gypsum in and Epsom and all that.
Yeah,
so
sure. Okay. So you chuck a bit of gypsum in and chuck a bit of Epsom salts in, that sort of thing. Yeah. You've probably got a pale ale in your quiver. In your recipe
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, right. How much gypsum do you chuck in that?
Well, I do a 40 litre. I brew on a 40 litre system. I think I chuck in maybe about between 2 to 4 grams, I think.
2 to 4 grams, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
Well, to make the harshness of the water softer. I think that's what gypsum's for, isn't it?
No.
No?
Gypsum adds hardness to water, right?
Oh, right. Okay.
And that's a really common thing is that there's a lot of misinformation out there about brewing water chemistry, and brewers will say, get the local council water report, and my water's really soft, and you know what? Soft water, hard water, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, right? The other thing that's most important about your water is the alkalinity of it, right? Because the thing is, you're going to add gypsum, you're going to add calcium chloride, and they're hardness salts. They add hardness. We add hardness. So whether you got soft water or not, who gives a fuck,
Yeah.
And so what we do in the implementation program is we modify our brewing water chemistry for whatever style of beer that we happen to be brewing at the time, and every beer is different. We understand our local water. We ignore things like historical city water profiles like Burton and Dublin and Pilsen and all that sort of stuff, because the water you got is the water that's coming out of your bloody tap, right? Yep. So we talk about how to adjust your brewing water chemistry with purpose.
Yep.
And we do it in 6 easy steps. Mm-hmm. Demystify it once and for all. Right. So if you and I spent an hour together, right, I would talk to you about how brewing water chemistry works and the 2 key things that you need to get right, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. You'd go away with that knowledge, use the 6 easy steps, modify your water chemistry, and from the very, very next time you brew that beer, change nothing in your recipe, just change the water. That beer will be banging.
Right.
Just changing the water.
Because that makes up, that's 90% of the ingredients that are going into
95%. If you've got a 5% alcohol beer, it's 95% water. It's hugely important. Yet it's the ingredient that, brewers often overlook. They're always looking at things like, what sort of malt can I put in it? What hops? What yeast? And the water gets forgotten. And so what happens is usually I see a lot of clients start out, they're randomly chucking gypsum or calcium chloride or Epsom salt or something like that in without purpose, without understanding what they're doing, not getting the flavour outcomes that they want, not keeping their eye on the 2 key flavour numbers in beer, and wondering, and they keep looking at the other 3 ingredients going, it needs more hops, it needs more malt, it needs different yeast or change the fermentation temperature. That's got nothing to do with it. It's really about the water. And if you get it right, your beers will be absolutely amazing.
So, Hendo, with a lot of the breweries that I have sat down and met with, they've spoken a lot about water filtration, RO systems or reverse osmosis systems get mentioned a lot. They say it creates sort of like a blank canvas to work with. Is that something that you endorse as well in breweries?
It depends on the water that comes into your brewery, and every brewery is different. So first of all, you can't rely on the local water authorities report.
Yep.
Because there's certain sample points around, your city or your town or wherever it is. And really those water reports are really about saying, hey, our water's safe to drink. They don't really they can provide information for brewers, but it doesn't take into account your pipes going into your building in your street, right? So, case in point, had a client here in Brisbane who was getting metallic notes in his beers. And after, we couldn't pinpoint it. We had the water tested and it was showing up nothing and scratching our head, and he was trying to resolve this issue. We ended up speaking to the right engineer at the local water authority, and they said, "Oh, you're on such and such street. Yes, there's a 120-year-old cast iron water main running up your street. We've been meaning to replace that for 15 years.
Yeah.
And so what happens is we know that it's rusting and flecks of rust come off, and we're going and just randomly going into your building." And completely, different to what the water report authority's report was, because it just was relevant to his street. And so that was a real aha moment. And so he was able to deal with that. So there's a lot of ways you can treat your water. You can do something as simple as, just sort of, carbon filtration or earth filtration, UV to kill bacteria. You can do reverse osmosis. This particular client, he had to install an ion exchange system in to get rid of the iron when it came through, ion exchange to get rid of the iron,
Yeah.
And so there's lots of things you can do, but the most important thing is to get to know your brewery's water first. So once you've got your brewery built, you've got your filtration or RO, whatever you happen to be doing, then you should get your water in your building tested post your water treatment. And that's your blank canvas. That's what you base all of your water adjustments, your brewing water chemistry and adjustments around.
Yeah, so don't rely on just the local report you find on the net. Just
absolutely not.
Pay someone to come out and do a thorough professional job of it.
Yeah, well, I offer that on my website. So basically, I partner with a laboratory, Melbourne-based laboratory, and I provide testing services for brewers. So water, wort, and beer I test. And so I have a couple of different flavors of water tests specifically for brewing water chemistry, and costs a couple $100, and you order it online and you get the report back online, and it's super easy.
Yeah, no, I know that some people have said that actually having the technical knowledge of making good quality beer at a commercial level is definitely one that seems to be an overlooked things with many breweries.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of my clients are like homebrewers who've decided to go pro, and the way that they've decided to go pro is not to get a job in a brewery, but go and build a brewery, go spend $500,000 or $1 million on a brewery.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with that. 10 years ago, we were severely limited in formal education opportunities here in Australia, and that's changing now with TAFE SA, Ultimo TAFE in Sydney, TAFE Queensland, which I'm involved with, University of Ballarat, Edith Cowan University, University of Queensland here in Brisbane. There's lots of changes happening with formal education, and that's a really good start. And I say to a lot of people who want to go and build a brewery is go get a formal education if you can in some way or another.
Yeah, I've had Neil Cameron come on and say the exact same thing.
Exactly. You can't. You're as soon as you become a professional brewer, right? You're a food manufacturer, right? And you got to act like a food manufacturer, because you have a duty of care and an obligation to your consumers that you've got to make something that's safe and does what it says on the tin, And so, a big thing that's happening here in Queensland is the Department of Health is buying cans of beer from bottle shops and breweries, and they're testing the alcohol in it. And you've only got 0.2% either side of what you put on the label. And if you're out, you get reported to Food Standards Australia.
Yeah.
You have a duty of care, because if you put, this beer is 1.3 standard drinks, right? And if you're 1% over in that can of beer, well, that's suddenly 2 standard drinks. Now, what if someone's going to drive home and they're basing their consumption based on those standard drinks? You've completely fucked that person over, right? We as alcohol manufacturers, we have a serious duty of care to get that right, and we can't mess it up. And we need to make quality products, right? Because there's lots of people out there, even today, 10, 12 years after I even started, that still just drink Carlton Draft or drink Great Northern or something like that, right? And they're just getting introduced to craft beer. Now, the thing is with those people who've drunk Great Northern all their life, right? Now, you might think, you might not think much of Great Northern, but I actually think it's a really high quality product, right? I don't think much of it, but that's value. That's different to quality, right?
Yep.
But I think Great Northern, and if you're, in the States, it's going to be a Bud Light or something like that. Bud Light's a very, very well-made beer. Do you know why why Carlton Draft and Bud Light and, Great Northern are very high-quality beers? Why do you think
consistent?
Consistent. Ever had a bad one?
No. Only if it's been in whiskey and some.
Yeah. Ever had one that's a diacetyl bomb? No. Ever had one that was, oxidized? Not necessarily because it's old, but ever had one that was oxidized or was the wrong color or was out of or was incorrect ABV?
Yeah.
Never happens. So those people who drink Bud Light, Carlton Draft, Great Northern, those consumers are actually really used to very, very high quality beer. And so when they get introduced to craft beer for the first time, right, they might not know a lot about beer and they might not be able to articulate. And in fact, I guarantee you they probably can't, right? But if they drink a craft beer for the first time and that craft beer is shit, right, might be a diacetyl bomb, might be oxidized, something like that, they won't be able to articulate why that beer is bad. They just know that it's bad, right?
Yep.
And if it's their first experience drinking craft beer and they have a bad experience, they never come back to craft beer. And that's bad for everybody. That's bad for the industry, right? And so when we become professional brewers, when you go and open your brewery and that sort of thing, you got to bring your A game, mate, because people are paying for your beer and it's more expensive than a Great Northern, all right? It's more expensive than a Carlton Draft, right? And you've got to give that value and it's really important if you're a new brewery and that sort of thing, for people not only who don't know craft beer, but those who are like the beer geeks and all that sort of stuff. If your first beers when you open the door are crap, those seasoned craft beer drinkers, they never come back. And how are you supposed to grow like a sustainable craft brewing business if people try your beer once and then go elsewhere? Just can't do it, right? That's why you got to bring your A game when you open your own brewery. It's super important. Do the job right, and what happens is really special. Consumers become very loyal to your brand. They buy your beer every week, and think about how your sales would go if people were buying a 6-pack or a carton of beer a week of your brewery, and all you had to do was just grow the number of consumers. It's a snowball effect, and you can create a really powerful brewing business if you just get the beer right. Because at the end of the day, your beer is your brand.
Do you think there's a bit of a problem within craft beer in Australia when it comes to consistency and those, starting out and just making that jump from home brewing to pro brewing? Do you think there's a large percentage of those that aren't following those sort of standards?
No brewer wants to make bad beer, right? I don't know any brewer, how experienced they are or, that sort of thing. They're all passionate about making beer, right? And making the beer the best that they can. No one wants to make a shit beer, right? But I think that the biggest mistake that a lot of people who go from home brewers to go pro do is they carry a lot of the homebrew
habits
with them. Yeah, I'd say the habits, right? Which might be things like treating it like a hobby. Like when I'm in a brewery and I'm working, I don't drink. If I'm home brewing on a Sunday, like I do with my mates down in my garage downstairs, bloody oath I'll have a couple of beers. But if I'm brewing in the professional sense, absolutely not. I don't touch it unless it's sensory or something like that. I make sure that I keep good records of what I do so that if something goes wrong, I have the ability to go back and look at what happened and learn from that mistake, and documenting lots of stuff. Probably the other big thing as well is that I see as well is, you're going down the path of building a brewery. Have you given any thought to safety?
Yeah, well, in an interview earlier on, I sat down with Glenn from The Grifter, and he actually brought it up as an important consideration and an often overlooked one, actually.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So my first job, the first job that I talk about was at Prickly Moses with Luke Scott, but I was actually employed at another brewery for 9 days. And the reason why I'm not at that brewery was that a 1,200 litre beer tank exploded in front of myself and the cellarman.
Wow.
And the blast blew him through a cold room wall and out the building. And he was in intensive care for a week and off work for 6 months. Breweries are very hazardous places. There's so many hazards. There's hot water, heavy kegs, hot work, chemicals, slips and trips and falls. There's so hazardous, and safety always comes before quality, in my eye. And my personal experience is a bit of a baptism of fire. And, I always make sure that I instill into my clients a culture of safety, and the same with my TAFE students as well, that we have a culture of safety.
And that's something these courses now at TAFE offer is talking about brewery safety and all the hazards and how to.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Big focus towards
for
that.
Sure. How to identify hazards, what to do with them, how to report them, how to control hazards and stuff like that. Yeah. That's why I love the TAFE thing. So yeah.
And you mentioned earlier about keeping a log, a brewing log. I noticed that on your website you mentioned that you're actually a brand ambassador for Beer 30, which is an American software. Is that something that you're still an ambassador of? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I've been doing that for coming up to 2 years early next year. And so, I'm brand ambassador for Beer 30, or the company's called The Fifth Ingredient. They think the fifth ingredient of beer is data. Before I was a brewer, I was working in IT. And so one of the things that I was always adamant about and been interested in for a long time was putting together a good brewery management system that would track inventory and procurement and production and fermentation and packaging and all that sort of thing. And I actually, when I first started Rockstar Brewer, I actually wrote a bit of an app myself. It was pretty shit, but it was just like something that I wanted to offer my clients. And I kind of quickly decided I'd owned a software company before, and I decided I didn't want to go down that path of running a software company again, and stumbled across Beer 30. I can't remember where I stumbled across it, and met PK and Ryan from The Fifth Ingredient, and said, look, I really like your product. I'd like to, offer it to my clients. And so they said, why don't you become a brand ambassador? So I'm the brand ambassador for The Fifth Ingredient for Australia and New Zealand. So what I do is basically an advocate for it. I know a lot of people in the industry, so I can sort of see which parts of the country, for instance, are growing in the number of breweries, and I sort of give them assistance around that. I also sort of help them with improvements to the product, because I am a brewer, so I come from that perspective. They place a very big importance on updating the product almost daily. It's enhanced, and so they work very closely with their clients and myself, and we have a lot of fun doing it. It's a very powerful tool, and so basically it's a way for a brewery to manage its data from grain to glass, right? So traditionally you would see a brewery have paper logs. Brewers are engineers, all brewers are engineers, right? And they're really bloody good at going down the rabbit hole of building really complex spreadsheets, right? Bloody brewers and spreadsheets. It's crazy, right? And they're trying to build something that suits them, and also whiteboards. So, paper logs, spreadsheets, whiteboards, right? And none of those things allow you to centralize your data, right? If I had a paper log, and let's say I've got a pale ale product that I'm brewing very frequently, and I'm trying to compare a good batch to a not so good batch so I can always make the good batch, you can't do that with paper, right? But if you have all of your data stored in one place, you've got a single point of truth, and then you're able to do those things. So basically taking your data, all these silos and all over, non-electronic forms, putting it into one place, collecting lots and lots of data in the brewery, and then manipulating the data, and most importantly, visualizing it. It's such a powerful tool when you can visualize the data. If you can overlay, for instance, fermentation charts of the same beer over the top of each other, think about things that you can learn about your process through that. I've solved some pretty major problems in some pretty large breweries based on doing things like that. But you have to collect the data in the first place.
And how does like Beer 30, and I'm sure there's other similar softwares on the market in Australia, but a typical homebrewer will be using Beersmith or Brewfather. I use Brewfather quite a lot.
Cool.
Are these sort of apps that even at a commercial level that a brewery would use as well?
I love Beersmith. I use Beersmith.
Yep.
Right. But I use Beersmith for recipe development. Right.
Right.
So if I'm trying to do calculations about what's the color of this beer going to be, what's the predicted ABV of this beer, what are the predicted IBUs of this beer, Beersmith, I love it. And if I'm doing water chemistry, I use Brewing Water, which is an Excel spreadsheet, right? But Beersmith or Brewing Water or Brewfather or Beer Alchemy or whatever you happen to use, none of those things will tell you about your inventory, where you're selling your beer, how much beer is in the tank, what needs to be done to it and when, how much did it cost to make. Beersmith does those things, but it's very rudimentary, right? And it's not a strong point. And certainly when you go and scale up things, let's say you got 20 tanks in your brewery, Beersmith is not going to be able to do that. It's a very, very good product and I love it heaps, but it's not designed to be able to run for a commercial brewing operation to keep good records. It doesn't. Beersmith's great for recipe development. It doesn't have good record-keeping capabilities. That's where it's kind of falls short. And most of the homebrew packages are the same. And so you want to be able to check your gravities on your tanks every day. And you want to be able to visualize them. You want to be able to see what's in the tank. Does it need to be dry hop today or tomorrow? Who's doing what with it? Who's brewing such and such today? Do I have enough malt to be able to mash in? Will this link to my accounting system? So one of the things that Beer 30 does is it links into Xero or QuickBooks Online, right? So if you sell beer, you sell your beer out of Beer 30, you can see what you've got in stock in whatever warehouses you happen to have, and you sell the beer to a client or a distributor, a customer or a distributor or something like that, or your tap room, and it deducts it and raises an invoice in Xero so that your accounting system knows that you've got to get paid. You see how it all sort of links together? That's what Beer 30 is about.
Oh, so it integrates with even your accounting software and all
Absolutely,
that?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Very good. Yeah,
and the really good thing about it is it's just so easy to set up and just get started and running. Like there's lots of other systems out there. There's things like ECOS and Orchestrated Beer and stuff like that. Orchestrated Beer is a big monolith product. It's SAP based. It's very, very expensive and that sort of thing. There are inventory systems, out there like Unleashed and Deer Inventory and all that sort of stuff. And inventory is great, but it's only part of the picture in a brewery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Inventory systems don't tell you what's the gravity of this beer in that tank and what should it be. So there has to be something where it's linked into your accounting system, right? And that's what Beer 30 does. And so basically, getting started with Beer 30 is really easy. It's basically you fill out a questionnaire that says what tanks you've got and how big they are, right? You tell them what's in the tank and how much of it there is. You punch in your first recipe and you're ready to brew. That's it. So easy. So that's why I'm a massive fan of it. I use it at the TAFE brewery that I run. It just makes running a brewery so much easier.
Yeah, well, it's something that I've definitely not considered in the inventory or software department. I've had guests on talk about accounting software and how to manage your books and all that. But yeah, it's another thing that I guess gets overlooked.
You've got to be on that, right? Because if you think about the life cycle of money in a brewing business, right? You've either got cash in your bank account, you use that cash to buy raw materials, which you then brew and make liquid that's in a tank. You then buy some packaging materials and that becomes packaged beer that's sitting in a warehouse. You then sell that beer to a customer and that becomes an invoice that's waiting to be paid. Then the invoice gets paid and becomes back into cash that's back in your bank account so you can do it all over again. The faster you can make that cycle happen, that cash flow cycle happen, the healthier your brewing business will be.
Yeah, I've had some other guests mention about not getting paid for kegs till 30-day plus. It's quicker to get your money back from bottle shops and all that. So there seems to be a big pivot towards
on
that.
average, so here's a really weird thing, right? So you want to buy, what sort of size tanks are you looking at? buying for your brewery?
Mate, don't know at this stage.
Let's say it's like a 20, 30 hectolitre tank, 20, 30 barrel tank, right? So you can buy those out of China for about 6 to 10 grand, more or less. Not expensive. But if you take into account all of the inputs that need to go into making beer, and specific to here in Australia when we've got excise and that sort of thing as well, a 30 hect tank of beer used to cost me about $12,000 to make, probably about $13,000 or $14,000 now, right? That's basically every 2 or 3 weeks. You've got to empty the tank, refill the tank, empty the tank, refill the tank. So the tank costs like $6,000 or $7,000. It costs nearly double that just to fill it. And you've got to do that every 2 weeks, right?
Yep.
So it's $14,000, $28,000, and so on and so on, right? And on average, it takes up to 90 days for you to get your money back. From the day you brew to the day that the last invoice is paid is around 90 days on average. So in that time, you have to tip more money in to keep filling and emptying the tank and selling beer, and you don't have that cash in your bank account. And unless you've got the financials sorted, both in terms of your cost control, which is what Beer 30 does really well, and your cash flow, making sure you get paid and chasing people up so you get paid, you're not going to have a successful brewing business. You will fail, right? Because you'll run out of money.
Yeah, cash flow seems to be a big problem, doesn't it?
Oh, shit, yeah. When you're selling beer into the wholesale market or to distributors and that sort of thing, it's very, very small profit margin, long payment terms, And that's why you see a lot of breweries have tap rooms, because it's like, there's your beer, give me your money. Not there's your beer, wait 30 days and then maybe you'll get paid. And even then it's a small amount,
Yep.
Sell kegs for $250 or $300 a pop versus $1,000 to $1,200 a pop. What would you rather do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, that's what a lot of people have said, that the production brewery, you've got to brew a lot of it. You've got to be brewing probably at least a million, or Pete from Wayward says probably 1.5 million in his opinion if you're in Sydney.
Yes, that's right.
And yeah, your greater margins are found in your tap room.
That's right.
Starting out that way would be probably smarter to do it.
Yeah, the Black Ops boys, I used to call it the dead zone, but they call it the valley of death, which is basically, so when you make your first, say, 100 to 150,000 litres of beer a year, when you have an excise manufacturer's license, you get an annual refund. It's kind of like the tax-free threshold for your personal income tax. It's $100,000 a year, right? And you get that cash. It's basically you get 60% of your excise back, up to $100,000 per year. Which, if you're making standard beers, it's around 120 to 150,000 litres of beer per year, right? Where you get that excise back, right? After that, you're paying the excise, so it becomes cash flow negative, and you become cash flow negative in a big way until you hit 1 million, or in the case of Pete, 1.5 million litres, depending on your costs, because it's Sydney and that sort of thing. And you're cash flow negative, which means you've got to keep tipping money in to keep making beer. Now, if you don't have the money, then you're shit out of luck, right? That's specific to Australia. I'm sure something similar would exist in other countries and that sort of thing, but they're the numbers for a typical Australian craft brewery. It's tough. Once you get through that, once you bust through that sort of glass ceiling, then you'll start to become cash flow positive, and then you're sort of doing okay. But it takes a lot of money to get there.
Yeah, that's what I'm finding out. What would you say is the sweet spot currently for having a successful brewery these days? What sort of model would you sort of recommend?
There's 2 models that you could do. It depends how much money you got. Be a brew pub.
Yep. And
sell takeaway cans or whatever, right? Or get big and be a big production brewery. There's no in between.
But you looked at the gypsy model as a potential springboard into.
I would not recommend that. No. I would not recommend that to anyone. It used to be viable. It just very quickly became unviable. Because the thing is, right, because even though I didn't have to put my hand in my pocket to build a brewery, I'm paying for somebody else's, right? And so your unit costs, you get no economies of scale, right? Yep. So if I was a gypsy brewer making 1 million litres a year, you pay what's called a co-pack fee when you gypsy brew or contract brew, right? It's the fee that you pay to the brewery for the electricity and the labour and all that sort of stuff, right? and it's not your raw materials, and it's not your packaging, right? It's a fee that it's like rent, okay? Now, that's a unit cost. So if I make a case of beer and the co-pack fee is, say, $20, just to pull a random number out. If you make 10,000 litres of beer a year or 1 million litres of beer, it's still $20. Whereas if I own my own brewery, right, I've got my space, and a lot of the costs become fixed costs. Rent becomes fixed cost. Things like rates and all that sort of stuff. Wages become fixed costs, right? And so then it becomes easy for you to become profitable, because if you can squeeze more beer faster through the same amount of rent, you're making money. You make more money. Right?
So I understand that gypsy brewing isn't a sustainable model. And I know that, if you want to do it long term, it's a tough slog with little margins, or if anything, if you break even, you're doing well. But I'm thinking of it as an opportunity to dip my toes in, build a brand,
yes,
get a trading history, build a following, and then maybe go and talk to an investor who's interested in our brand, or going to talk to an angel investor that wants to just help us out with investing in our equipment or whatever. So that's sort of where I'm looking at in that perspective.
I speak to lots of people. Is that something you're considering yourself, Chris?
It is an option, but it is something that I'm learning throughout this. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is just talking to people and getting their opinions on what they recommend. Yes. A lot of people are saying brew pub is a great model. It's where you're going to get greater margins. And then if you want to become a production, you've got, maybe pick a location where you can expand to become a production.
Yes.
Look at I want to make sure people like my beers. And I don't know if I want to invest $500,000 in a brewery, then dial in my recipes, build the brand from there. I just feel it would be, if I can break even doing the gypsy model route, then I can go into my premises with already a brand, a following, and some recipes dialed in. I can have a little bit of a head start, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that, right?
Yep.
So let's say you want to be a gypsy brewer to get the brand out there until you go and build your own brewery to test the market, right? Mm-hmm. I talk to lots of people like you who consider that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what sort of beers are you thinking of making?
Well, your typical pale ale, like to have a Pilsner, an IPA, and probably around 3 core beers, and then having a seasonal here and there.
Okay. What do you plan to sell? What would you like the retail price of a 6-pack of your pale ale to be?
Probably around that 25 to 30 mark, I guess.
Yep, $25, right?
Yep.
So $25 it means that you're going to be so you can reverse engineer a bottle shop price to the wholesale price. They've got pretty fixed margins. I won't go into too much detail around it, but it's
you're right.
Very easy to reverse engineer. So basically, you're talking around your sell price being about $2.30 to $2.60 per stubby or can. That's your wholesale price for a $25 6-pack. Okay, times 24, $2. Let's call it $2.50 times 24. $2.50 times 24. It's all even $3, right?
Yep.
Let me get my calculator out here. So 3 times 24. Let's call it $3, right?
Yep.
Is 70. Actually, that's pretty excessive. That's not a wholesale price at all. It's going to be about $2.50, right? Means you're going to be selling your beer for $60. Your raw materials are going to be at least $1, $1.50, maybe even $2 a litre. There's 9 litres in a case of 375ml cans, right? So that's $9. Cans are about 20 cents plus 5 cents. So if I've got $9 for my raw materials for the liquid, and I've got 0.25 times 24, so that's $6. So that's $15. Got labels, which are going to be about 20 cents each. So plus 24 times 20 cents, that's $4.80. Let's add on the container deposit scheme. So that's $3.60. Right, it's $23. You're going to need a case that's going to be about 80 cents. We're going to need to add excise. It's going to be about $14. Right, we're at $38 now. Okay. So what do we got? We've got liquid. We've got a can. Oh, we need a pack. We need some pack techs, right? So they're about 40 cents each. You need 4 of those. So that's about, let's call it $2. Right. So we're at $40 now. It's a box of beer, pack tech on a pallet. That's so basically that $40, that's your ex-works price, right? That's at the brewery. Now you got to get it to the bottle shop that you're selling, right? It's going to cost you about $8 to get it to just Metro through a 3PL. So it's going to cost you some money to get it to the central warehouse, to store it, and then to get put on a truck to get delivered, right? So let's call that $8, right? So it's $48. And then you got to pay someone to make the beer and sell the beer. And that hasn't been factored in yet, because all we've got is unit cost. You haven't paid yourself, right? You haven't paid the sales rep who sold it. Sales rep's going to take 15%. So after $48, it's going to be about another $6. Right? That's $54. You still haven't been paid. We still have to get this beer on into the bottle shop for $60, right? Otherwise, it's not going to be a $25 six-pack. It's going to be a $35 six-pack. No one's going to buy a six-pack for $35. So you've basically got $5 there. That's your gross profit, right? You still haven't paid yourself. Still haven't paid your accountant. Still haven't done your marketing, your branding, your social media, all those other things you need to do, your petrol for your car, all that sort of stuff. That's not fitting into $6, $6. So to answer your question, Chris, it is impossible in Australia to be a gypsy brewer and be competitive and make core range products like pale ales and lagers and IPAs and stouts and shit like that, right?
Right.
Impossible. You cannot be competitive. I didn't even add on the co-pack fee, 48. That we're at $48. You're going to need to add, it's about $2.50 a litre. So 2.5 times 9. So it's another $18. Your carton of beer is already $70 at a bottle shop.
So what has sort of changed since the days when you were doing it and, many other breweries who started out that way? What has changed to make it not that favourable anymore?
Well, it's not. To be fair, it was the core range product that was part of the problem with BrewCult, right? Because when I started, I was doing a lot of specialty beers, and I was doing beers in 500ml bottles, and so the packaging costs were much cheaper. And because it was specialty beers aimed at beer geeks, I could charge a higher price. The beers used to sell for about $10 or $12 retail for one 500ml bottle, and so I could make a decent margin on that. Not core range beer; it's too competitive. Yeah. As soon as you start going into making pale ales and stuff like that, you're competing with big breweries like, Hawkers and Brick Lane and Young Henrys and all that sort of stuff that are making cracking beers. They're doing it much more competitively than any gypsy brewer possibly can. You just can't compete on price. You will lose money. There is no point investing 1 cent whatsoever in, quote, getting the brand out. You are better off keeping that money in your pocket and building your own brewery.
Yeah, and listen, that's the whole reason I have people on like you to sort of give us these realities that whack us in the face. And like I said, has been something that I've been sort of formulating in my mind during this podcast, but I don't think anyone's sort of been as brutally honest as you have been just now.
Yeah, of course. It's better to know these things now, Chris, and not make that same mistake that I did in going down that path of being a gypsy brewer. Name one gypsy brewing company or, who from 2 years ago that still exists or is still operating as a gypsy brewer. Name one. Can't Australian one. No, can't think of one. All of them are either become breweries in their own right, have built their own brewery, right? Or they don't exist anymore. That's where you go if you go down the path of being a gypsy brewer.
Well, that is the angle that I'm looking at. Like I said, I'm not looking at it as a sustainable model. But what you're saying is don't save your money and just go the brew pub route.
Save your money. Yeah, man. Back yourself. Sure, your beers are great. I believe that your beers are awesome, right? But there's absolutely no point in sending good money after bad in trying to, quote, get the brand out, right? Your brand will get out when you build your fucking brewery. Just back yourself, right? If you don't feel confident in your product and your passion and your vision for the beers that you want to create, to not build a brewery, don't build a brewery. Stay homebrewing.
Yeah, and I completely hear what you're saying there and where you're going with it. I look at it in a different aspects. Is yes, the brand, dip your toes in the market before investing in stainless. But the other thing is, I look at it as a proven concept. It's a business. It has some trading history. My biggest concern is trying to see where I'm going to get the capital to have a real good go from the very beginning, because a lot of these breweries who I'm talking to are saying that the common theme is they're starting out too small, or they started out too small. What they would have done differently starting out would have been having more capital behind them and starting bigger, because, you know, you've had people like Pat from Willie who have expanded a number of times and, you know, and they wish they went bigger from the beginning. So I guess any comments regarding that?
Absolutely. But, if you're going to be big, you've got to have the working capital behind you to support it.
Yep.
There's no problem with you whatsoever in going and getting your pale ale and your lager and that sort of thing brewed. But man, that's a lot of money, a lot of money to tie up in beer with a really, really small margin. You're better off, even with interest rates at 0.1% as they are now, stick your money in the bank. You're going to do better, right? You will not be cash flow positive selling core range beers as a gypsy brewer. It just is impossible. And I would not recommend that anybody do it whatsoever. And I've done it. Here's the other thing as well, right? If you're a gypsy brewer, you don't have an excise manufacture license, so you do not get the $100,000 a year cash back from the ATO. Now, that's $100,000 to be on your bottom line. Build a fucking brewery, you get one. Know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, hearing you loud and clear now.
literally, the government will pay you $100,000 a year for you to go and build a brewery. That's the thing that people just don't get, So go build your brewery, man. That's my advice to you.
Oh, well,
and if you don't have the capital for it, then you need to partner with some people who share your vision. No one is going to invest in a gypsy brewing company with a poor trading history that is cash flow negative.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right?
That is a good point.
You need to come up with a rock solid business plan that has starting out being brew pub based. So you've got that retail margin and retail cash flow, and a good business plan that has good costs under control, both for like your outgoings and for your cost of production. And you need to know how much it costs to make beer. Have a good business plan, and a good investor will see that and share your vision, want to be part of it. And that's who you want to partner with, right? Rather than sort of saying, oh, I've got the brand out there. No one cares. No one cares about the brand, about the brand being out there.
Yeah, I guess you've given me a number of things to think about now, Hendo.
I gave you the reality check. I'm not trying to, rain on your parade or anything like
that.
No,
I need this, mate. That's the whole point of it.
But the reality is, if you don't get this right, man, I was very not financially in a very bad place, and it took several years for me to pay back the money that I owed, after the end of BrewCult, being a gypsy brewer. Still recovering from it, right? And it's been several years. You just don't want to go there.
Yeah, well, I guess all the audience, including myself, can sort of learn from some of the mistakes that you're sharing with us right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's move off the gypsy dream killing topic. Let's move on to. I'd love to get your insights about the industry and. Mate, we've definitely gone over time, but if you've got maybe another 5 or so minutes just to give us your take on the craft beer industry, where it's heading, and what it looks like for new entrants. A lot of people said we're not quite at the beginning, but we've definitely got a lot more room to grow. So do you want to share some thoughts on all that?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that there is room for more breweries to be built and start in Australia. Lots. In fact, but it's got to be based around the hyper-local thing. You've got to be that local brewery. Unless you've got lots of money to be able to have national distribution, which is a pretty cutthroat game. You want to be in Dan Murphy's, a very cutthroat game. But there are some breweries around, here in Brisbane that are doing extremely well by building up a loyal following of being hyper local. And the funny thing is, it doesn't have to be, like a brew pub. Talking about Smokey and Lukey from Currumbin Valley, they're not allowed to have people at their brew because it's on a farm, right? And so they sell all their beer online and direct to consumers. So they get that retail margin and retail cash flow without having to have a tap room or without having to sell their beer into the wholesale trade. And they're doing very well out of it, and they're growing and that sort of thing. And I think that that's the future of breweries in Australia, being the local brewery, right? And as long as you're not in the inner west of Sydney, where it's quite saturated,
yep.
And continues to become even more saturated, there's lots of other places all over Australia that are right to have a brewery built. And it could be a suburb in your city. It could be a small town. It could be in a tourism region or something like that. There's plenty of room for more breweries.
Definitely. And where do you see, I guess there's, a few trends going on at the moment with the hazies, sours, low alcohol beers. Do you see that these beers are here to stay, or do you see anything else on the horizon?
Oh, look, they said, when I was making beers back in 2013 for BrewCult, they were going, sours are going to be the new IPA. That never happened. IPA will continue to be a big thing. I think we're starting to see a rise and a new appreciation for good lager because it suits our climate. And I like making it for the challenge of making it. I think a lot of brewers do this, once they get through their lupulin threshold shift and that sort of thing. I love IPA, man, a lot. And there's some really, really good ones out there. And IPA will continue to be relevant for many, many years to come, whether they're hazy, whether they're brute, whether they're West Coast or East Coast or English or bloody whatever. IPA is just the thing that will stay. I think we'll start to see, particularly here in Queensland, lower alcohol beers have been very popular. When I had BrewCult, my biggest selling beer was Reset Robot, which was a mid-strength pale ale. And so mid-strength beers here in Queensland sell like hotcakes if they're done well. And I think we'll start to see kind of underlying, it will never really become mainstream, but wild beers, barrel-aged beers and stuff like that will start to be a thing. You got Wildflower in Sydney, like Black Hops are building the AWOL project here in Brisbane, Ballistics building a sour brewery beer project here and that sort of thing. And they'll, Stone and Wood does it as well. Forest for the Trees, that's really about saison, but they do a bit of barrel aging and that sort of thing. And they will be sort of, I think if we see the rise of something around sour and wild beers, predominantly, that's going to be a sub-brand of an established brewery, and I'll see more of those, which is good to see.
We're seeing more seltzers on the market now as well.
Oh, look, yeah.
What's your opinion of those? Are they?
It's interesting. Look, to make a clear drink that's got fruity flavours in it sort of seems a bit more like an RTD to me than a beer. It's more closely aligned to an RTD. But that said, though, you can't beat their appeal being super easy drinking. What I do see a trend towards is more healthy drink or health conscious drinking. So you might see low carb beers. Seltzers are generally supposed to be low sugar and therefore low carb. And combine that with low alcohol, then the calorie content is much lower. So I guess you would call that better for you drinking. So seltzers definitely a part of that. How long seltzers last, whilst some brewers classify them as beer under the tax law, remains to be seen. I think that very quick, you've obviously heard of the Alcopop tax that came in about 13, 14 years ago.
Right? No, I don't know if I did.
So basically there was a time when the big brewers, you'd buy like a Smirnoff Double Black, right?
Yep.
And it was like a 6% Smirnoff lemon buddy RTD in a clear bottle, right? They were actually beers. They were made from barley and then flavored had fruit flavors and sugar in them, no bitterness in them. and they were dirt cheap because they were being made from cereals. That was the definition of beer at the time, according to the ATO. The big breweries were getting around that. Instead of using vodka, they'd use malt and decolor it and make a beer, all right? And so the alco pop tax isn't actually a tax. It was just a redefinition of what beer is according to excise law. And so some of the seltzers that are coming out now are coming out because they're made from cereal grains. They do have some bitterness in it. They don't have a lot of sugar in them, which they fall under that. They may not necessarily be in the spirit of beer as far as the ATO is concerned. I'm sure they've got their eye on that. Who knows what will happen with seltzers? I don't think Australians, up until this point, White Claw's just recently been released in Australia, and I think now that White Claw's here, consumers are starting to understand what seltzer is, and I think that will lift other seltzer brands. See what happens.
Yeah, I know that Dan from the Australian, they have a bit of a range out now, like a peach seltzer, a ginger seltzer, and they've got about 4 out now.
I don't know. As far as people want to drink them, that's totally fine, man. But I still don't think you can beat a bloody pint of Stone and Wood Pacific Ale on a Sunday afternoon at the pub.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Or something similar, that's just floats my boat,
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Hendo, for giving us, I think this is our longest episode to date, actually. So, and listen, you've smacked me in the face with a number of realities, and I do appreciate. I know you probably feel like you've poured cold water on sort of the aspirations and all that, but I guess some guests have done that throughout this podcast, and that's what it's all about. People sort of learning through the information I get, and we don't need it to be sugar-coated. And like you said, you've lived through it. You've been through some financial hardship through the gypsy route, and who best to sort of tell us about whether to do it or not? Someone like yourself is so well known.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure whatever path you choose to go will be a cracking one, and I'll keep a close eye on you, Chris.
Yeah, well, I guess if the podcast is successful and it's not, talking to crickets, I guess I'm going to have to fucking do it eventually, I guess, because everyone's
bloody yeah.
So it's sort of like it's out there now, No, I do appreciate you taking the time. And any final closing thoughts or advice you'd like to mention?
No, I think I've pretty well covered it there. If you're listening to this podcast and you'd like to know more about what I do for startup and established breweries, head over to my website, which is rockstarbrewer.com, and you'll be able to see what I do. And I give away a bit of some stuff for free and that sort of thing for startup breweries, and to help them, make some good decisions around getting their brewery and making it successful and that sort of thing. So, head on over there. And thanks very much for having me today, Chris.
No, I appreciate you coming on, mate. So everyone, I hope you enjoyed today. That was Steve Henderson, or aka Hendo, from the Rockstar Brewer. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Build Me a Brewery podcast. That was part 2 of the Brewery Consulting and Quality Management segment. Part 3 of the 4-part segment is up next. In this episode, I chat with IBA Young Gun of the Year winner Dan McCulloch and Oceania Technical Manager Richard Chamberlain, both from Lalemond. In this chat, we talk all things quality management and beer consistency, where both of these blokes are extremely knowledgeable and passionate about helping breweries reach their full potential in beer quality and consistency. As always, if you're liking the podcast so far and find the content useful, please give us a follow and rating on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, follow us on all our social media handles, as well as visiting our website, www.buildmeabrewery.com.au, and much more complimentary content will be coming your way if you sign up to our mailing list. I'm Chris Hayton, your host, and this is the Build Me a Brewery podcast.